Hello, welcome to Mobile Application Development Laboratory. In this video, I'll be explaining Counter Application Program. The statement of the program is, write a program to create an activity with two buttons, Start and Stop button. On pressing the Start button, the activity must start the counter by displaying the number from 1 and the counter must keep on counting until the Stop button is pressed. Display the counter value in the text view control. The UI is very simple. You have two text views, one for counter application display. The other text view is to display the value in your counter. Two buttons called as Start and the Stop button. Let us start designing the UI and coding the program. So it's a program which is on Android. Let's click on New Project, Empty Activity, and next. We type the name of this as Counter Lab 5. Click on Finish. Application is ready, so we are ready for the UI design. We already have a text view. I drag it to the top of the layout and change the text in the attribute window and name this as Counter Application and set the characters here to capital letters. Counter Application. Align it to the center of the box. Set the text to capital letters. You want to change the color. Okay, this time we make it as purple color and change the font size to 24. Make it bold. And then we say apply. The constraint is ready and we can simply copy this text view so that we can simplify our job on the design. So instead of counter application for the text, we change this to counter value. As is being given in the UI, we change this to counter value on the screen. And here is a place where we want the counter to start. So that means we have to have an ID, simple ID to remember. We just give it as text underscore value. It asks for refactor. Click on OK. And the next is we need to have two buttons. So I take the first button, apply the constraint to it. This should be done and the constraints are there, so I copy this, paste. We need two buttons for that. So for this button we change the label of this to start. And because it has an interaction to be done, we need to give an ID to this. So for the button attributes, we give it as btn underscore start. Very simple to remember, and click on this. Second, okay, I just move it up. I put it down here. Right, this is our start button, and then this is going to be the stop button. So go to the text and we give it as stop. ID also has to be done because we have to give an action to this on pressing the stop button, and we label it as btn underscore stop. For your ID, click on this button. Yes, we have the UI design, counter application, counter value, start and stop button. Next part is going to the code. So we have to do the first step is for every button that we have created which need to have an interaction, we first have to create a variable in the Java. So I just copy this, For the button, we are giving it as button start, button stop, and for text view, it is called as counter value. And counter has to be incremented, so we initialize it to 0, and to access the program values for the boolean, we say it as running is set to false. So these are the variables that we need to have. So I just copy that and placed it in the main activity. And as usual, a button class has to be imported, and similarly the text view also has to import. So you can see these two classes have been imported here. The next step is, for every variable that you have set as button start should be associated with btn underscore start, button stop should be done with btn underscore stop, and this counter value has to be linked to txt underscore value. And because these two are button, we call on click listener, and this is your text view. For the text view, we will set it to find view by id. So I copy these two set of code and then I paste it here. Very simple. So now, as usual, this has to be made a reference for an action to be done. So we click on this. Second is main activity implements Android. This option, and I say okay. So we have, on clicking this particular button, what it has to do. We need to explain that. So if you click a start button, we are calling a user defined function called as counter start. If you click on stop button, it has to call counter stop. So this is the part of code that we need to write. So I copy this and paste it here, right? And these two are user defined functions. So we right click, show the method, and here we need to click on create method in the main activity, the first option. Yeah, it is ready. And then similarly for your stop also, we have to right click the stop button, show context action, create method stop counter in the main activity. So here we have the stop. That means when you click on the button stop, the counter should stop and enable the start button. That is the set of code that we need to write. So how do we reference? You are setting running to false and then disabling the stop button. So we set it to false and enabling the start button. So enable button is made it as true. So we copy this code for the stop button action. So when you press a stop button, it has to stop the counter. So running is made as false. Stop button is disabled. Start button is been enabled. So we have written the code. Now when you click on the start button, certain actions need to be done. So what has to be, what we need to do here is, we need to have the counter to start from 0. Running is set to true because we want the counter to start and we want it to run. And this running of this will be done through the thread. So we have a thread which is going to be set here. And for that we have to create an object of class. And here we will have two threads running. First thread will be to interact with the UI, and second thread will be for incrementing the counter value. So there are two threads which are being created here when you are running your start counter. The first thread is to interact with UI, and the second thread is going to be to increment the counter value. So this is an example of multi-threads. So this is what is happening in this code. So we copy this code and paste it here, right? So we have my counter is red. So we right click on this, show the context. Here you make a note that you are selecting create inner class my counter. Okay, and we click here. So we are doing this action which has to be done. Okay, so what are we trying to do in this part of code is we first have to create an handler. So we specify with this handler part. I copy this handler. Okay, a handler class has to be imported, and handler is basically to provide communication channel between the threads, and we have to send the value from the my counter to the main activity. For that we need to have handler. So I import that class. We take the first option there, a handler is created. Similarly for looper also we are importing the class, and we have the message. For the message we import the class, import with this activity, and we have the word what is an integer value, and it will be sent to my counter, and we are giving a semicolon here. The reason why we give semicolon to the handler is to say that it is for my counter thread. For that reason we are giving a semicolon for your handler function that has been created, that we have done. Now the next part is we have to write for my counter, and we remove this private class because this method has to interact with other thread. For that reason we need to delete the private for your class. And then in the code, as you can see, we are calling a run method, and in that run method we have to make it as public. We make the run as public, and then to check whether the thread is running or not, we are calling system.out.println, and we call this thread.current threads for that, and we start incrementing the thread. Then we call the handler, which has been defined above, for the communication between the threads, and we are asking the thread to start and give a time duration for every counter is being set. For the gap between the counter value is set to 1000. This is what we will be doing in my counter definition. So I copy this part of code. Now you can see the information. One more point that you have to keep in mind here is that run is a public. If not been mentioned, make it as public. And also we need to have this my counter should extend threads, should extend thread. Yeah, so we have our program code ready. Let us run the program as all actions are being set. Now it is almost getting ready to run the program, and we have the program, the console, which is ready here. We have the application as counter application. Now both the buttons are enabled in the beginning. Now when I click on the start button, instead of counter value, as you can see, the counter is incrementing, disabling the start button, enabling the stop button. Now when I click on stop button, stop is disabled, start is enabled button. So it has stopped the counter at 12. On clicking the start button, again it starts the counter from the beginning. Now here there is a gap between the counter getting displayed. It is because in the program code we have written as thread.sleep as 1000, so which creates a time gap between the counter values. In this way we are executing the next lab program, which is on counter application. Thank you all.